And welcome to another edition of Ed Henry's Front Row Seat. And you know, I've been talking about it as we've had some of these baseball legends on the program that I'm a Yankees fan, but I'm not a Mets hater growing up here in New York. So it's a great honor to have Art Shamsky, who is the author, co-author with Eric Sherman of this new book, After the Miracle, all about the miracle Mets of 1969. It talks about this lasting brotherhood. And I want to start with something that people have seen recently that's been, I bet it's been emotional for you as this book comes out, poignant, you know, uplifting, but tough at the same time, that Tom Seaver, Tom Terrific, who was really kind of the lifeblood of this remarkable team, his family just announced recently that he's suffering from dementia. We probably are not going to see him in public. What does that mean for you?
Well, it was a shock when I heard it, but realistically, we knew a couple years ago when Eric and I decided to do this book that Tom was not well. He wasn't feeling great. He wasn't traveling anymore. He hadn't been to the Hall of Fame festivities for a couple years. And that's the reason we decided to make the trip out there and try and get together with him, bring a couple teammates with us.
Because this book, it sort of takes you on this journey. It's fascinating, where you want to have like a little reunion out in California because Tom Seaver, the great Hall of Fame pitcher, has a vineyard out there.
Well,
so
we didn't want to do an interview with him over the phone. We thought it would be much more intriguing to go out there and see him. The problems we had were logistic problems, trying to get the guys together who was available. Buddy Harrelson was one of the guys, and he announced a little while back that he was in early stages of Alzheimer's. But Buddy and Tom were very good friends. They were roommates when we played together, and we thought that would work. But again, trying to get the guys together and work on the travel and everything to get.
Yeah.
But the real problem we had was with Tom himself, because Tom, when I originally talked to him, he said, you know, I'd love to do it, but you need to talk to my wife, Nancy, because I might not remember the dates and everything. So through a lot of calls with her, we coordinated this, but she did tell me right off the bat, you know, you're going to come all the way out here, and Tom might not feel great, and he has good days and he has bad days. And so we rolled the dice, we made the trip out there, and still when we got to San Francisco Airport and coordinating Jerry Kuzman and Bud Harrelson, who came with us, and Ron Swoboda, we had to all coordinate that as planes got in. And then when we got there, we still didn't know if we were going to be able to see Tom. Well, it turned out that he was feeling good the next day, and we sat down with him, and it was a revelation for all of us to be out there with him in California.
Well, I want to get to that revelation. Let's start big picture, though, because you write in the book, if the Mets can win the World Series, then anything is possible. I mean, these were the lovable losers starting in 1962. Talk about kind of what happened in this city of New York, what happened around baseball, the idea that these losers, if they could win the World Series, anything in America can happen.
Well, you know, I'm not taking the blame for them being the losers, because I didn't get over there till 1968.
That's right.
So I wasn't part of the lovable losers in the early 60s. But even in 68, when I got over there, we finished 9th, a half game out of 10th. You know, and I think the real beauty of this whole thing is that when people talk about that team, it really is about two things that really stand out in my mind. The first thing is that this team was so bad and had no chance of winning, even with all the good young players we had. And to win it all and against a terrific Baltimore Oriole team in 1969, people remember that because they knew how bad the team was in the early 60s, mid-60s. We never finished better than 9th place with one division in the National League back then, and even in 1969 we were a half game out of last place in 68. But that's important because people remember how bad we were. But the second thing, and you know about history, and even though you weren't born at the time, I don't believe.
71, so I just missed it.
Okay. The world was in disarray. It's in disarray now, but the fact
you write about Vietnam War,
Vietnam War,
protests,
assassinations. The city of New York was going under financially, socially, spiritually. People were in a lot of trouble. And what we did is we made people feel better about their lives for a brief period of time. And people have passed that on. It's resonated with people who have passed that on to generation after generation. I run into people like yourself who weren't even born when we played and won, but they know about that team from their parents or grandparents.
And those signs in the stands, you gotta believe, right?
Everything was in the stands. I mean, it was a team that people loved. I mean, it was we were not making any money. There was, other than Tom Seaver, who was a star at the time, but even Tom was a young player. But we had really good players. But we were a nucleus of guys that young guys that just started to believe, and we won. And of course, we were led by the great Gil Hodges, and who so much talked about him about not being in the Hall of Fame. But he was a manager who really got the most out of.
Should he be in the Hall of Fame?
I do believe he should be in the Hall of Fame. Because, first of all, he had a great career as a first baseman with the Dodgers, and then finished his career with the Mets. But if you look at his stats compared to guys who are in the Hall of Fame, like Orlando Cepeda, Ron Santo, Tony Perez, they're all similar. And I'm biased because I played for the guy. He was a tough guy, but he really got the most out of all the players.
Right, because when I wrote my book on Jackie Robinson, I talked to Carl Erskine, some of his teammates. They would talk about what a nice guy Hodges was, but at the same time,
but don't get him angry.
Right, you write that he was a Marine, very stoic, and I think you wrote that you'd take one look at him and think, be careful, because you didn't want to cross him. But at the same time, he was a very complex character. He never screwed you over. He would be straight with his players, and you say that you'd never be blindsided.
Yeah, he never embarrassed any player. If he had a problem with you, he would call you into his office, maybe even the next day. I always felt like when we walked by his little office there to get out the field at Shea Stadium, and the door was open, if I got by that room without him calling me in, it was already a good day.
And when he called you together at the beginning of the '69 season and basically said something to the effect of, "You guys don't know how good you are," it seems like that instilled confidence. Talk about leadership.
Yeah, I remember the first day. He came over in '68, the same year I did, along with Tommy Agee, Al Weiss, J.C. Martin. There was a number of us that all joined the team at the same time, and that was Gil's first year. And I'll never forget the first day in spring training where he said, "You guys will not be the same old Mets as everybody knows." And he was right. We didn't win that year, obviously, but you could start to see his tenure as a manager, what it meant to the team. And really, he was a guy that really taught us how to play the game better than we were playing it. And the beauty of Gil was that he was a manager that managed by feel. And he knew that he was going to have to use the guys at the end of the bench at some point during the season, and he needed them, and he got everybody involved. And he started platooning at 4 positions and sometimes 5 with catcher with Jerry Grody and J.C. Martin and Duffy Dyer. But he got the most out of everybody. But in 1969, as you mentioned, when he said, well, you guys are better than you think, it was hard for us to imagine that because we finished 9th the year before. But he instilled in us a way to play the game. And
the platoon system that you talk about. So you had all these great outfielders. You mentioned Swoboda and was it Clendenin and Agee.
At first base, Clendenin and Eddie Cranepool.
And Cranepool. But somehow it could be hard to be selfless and share the time. But you guys did it, and then you end up being a World Series hero.
Well, you know, it's an interesting point because a lot of people don't realize this. You know, when you get platooned in a position, it's not really good for your career. Nobody likes it. It's very difficult to play. And I'll give you a perfect example. In the playoffs that year, I had a terrific playoffs against Atlanta. That was the first year of division play. And I hit .537, I believe, and we swept Atlanta in 3 games. But I don't start the first game of the World Series. But then I end up pinch hitting.
You hit .537 in round 1. You're the hottest thing in baseball, essentially, and you sit Game 1 of the World Series.
I ended up pinch hitting in the 9th inning of that game. He set me up to pinch hit. And the little trivia there, I have the distinction of making the last out of the only game we lost in the World Series. But you made a really interesting point, and a lot of people don't understand this. When you get platooned as a player, it really does nothing for your career. It hurts you in the long run. They use that against you when you try to go in and do another contract.
You only had 9 home runs instead of 18 or 20.
But what happened with us in that year particularly is that Gil instilled in us an understanding that it was the best thing for the team. I platooned in right field with Ron Swoboda, and together we had a great year, 20-something home runs, almost 100 RBIs. But in the long run, it didn't help our career. But we tolerated and we did it because Gil was honest with us and it was working.
But you remind me, it was moving when I read you talking about sitting in the on-deck circle, as I recall, at Shea Stadium in that Game 1 of the World Series. Take us inside. you're kind of a lifelong baseball guy, and now you're at the pinnacle, and you're sitting in the on-deck circle, and you start looking around the stadium, and you got emotional.
Oh, I did. It was, for me, it was, I had about a minute. He sent me up to pinch hit. It was 2 outs in the ninth. The game's on the line. And there was a little brief period where I just started thinking about all the times I played Little League baseball, high school baseball, American Legion baseball, and then went into the minor leagues and rode the buses and did all the things you have to do to get to the next level.
Paying all your dues all the way.
All the dues all the way, and all these things came to my mind, and I said, all to do what I'm doing right at this moment. It's every kid's dream to be in the World Series. And it's funny because you mentioned that at bat, and I think about that at bat every single day of my life, because I ended up grounding out to second base. Could have been a hero, and there was so many things in my career on a personal level that I did really well.
Right.
And I think about that at bat every day, because it was a very special time, and I thought about all these things that I did to get to this moment. And ended up being on a team that wins the World Series. And
it's funny you say that, because I had an at-bat in Little League where I came up with the bases loaded and I struck out. And I don't think about it every day. That would be an exaggeration. But
well, if I would have struck out, I might have tried to forget about it. But I grounded out to second base. But it was one of those things that it's vivid in my mind. And I used to run into the pitcher, Mike Cuellar, who's since passed away, who was pitching for Baltimore. And I said to him, I could have just as easily hit that ball out of the ballpark. And he said, yeah, it was right down the middle of the plate. But it's funny. Yeah, we talked about it, yeah.
And I have a recollection as a kid going to Shea Stadium, and Davey Johnson, former Oriole, was the manager. I've since gotten to meet him because he wrote a book recently, as you know, that's also interesting.
Well, Eric Sherman, the co-writer who wrote the book with me, wrote that book.
There you go. It was a great book. Eric's a wonderful writer then. And I just remember a picture at Shea Stadium of you guys celebrating winning the '69 series. And as we recall, Davey Johnson, the future manager of the Mets, he's made the last out.
Made the last out to Cleon Jones, yeah. Stop and think about that year, Ed. The Jets won the Super Bowl, we won the World Series, and the Knicks in May of 1970 won the NBA championship, all for the first time. And you're a sports person, you'll understand this. When you see Joe Namath running off the field pointing his finger,
Broadway Joe,
and then Cleon Jones going down almost to one knee to catch the fly ball to win the World Series, and then Willis Reed running on the court for Game 7 against the Lakers, those are icon moments in the history of sports.
All within a couple of years here in New York.
All the same year, all the same period of time. And we all won for the first time. Nobody had ever won before. And that's part of the year that made it so special. But, it's funny that Davey Johnson made the last out in that game. and he tells everybody it was one of the best balls he ever hit, and thought it was going out of the park, but it wasn't.
And you talk about the great iconic sports moments, but it seems to me, and as you say, I wasn't born yet, but it was actually on my birthday 2 years before I was born, we got a man to walk on the moon, July 1969. You write about being in, I think, an airport bar in Montreal with the team, watching that.
Yeah.
That gave America the same year the idea anything can happen.
It was so many great things happened this year, but we were in the lounge at the airport because our plane had mechanical problems. Otherwise, we would have been in the air flying, I don't know where we were going the next day, or for that night, but we ended up watching it, and it was a spiritual moment, to say the least. It was John Kennedy had said we're going to go to the moon, and he was right. And it was a year for us on a personal level that had a lot of bad, but so many interesting and great things for us on a team level that happened to us. But that was one of the greatest moments in the country's history.
And you talk about a lot of bad, and through any season or any year in anyone's life, there's ups and downs. And you got to have somebody like Yogi Berra, who's a coach. When we talk about characters on this team, obviously a great Yankee, but then he's coaching the Mets, and I think there's an anecdote where everyone knows the Yogiisms, get to a fork in the road, take it, and all of that. Yeah. But I think another coach said that his wife had gone to see Dr. Zhivago. And Yogi said, "Is she okay? What's wrong with her?"
Yeah.
And they said, "No, it's a movie. It's not a doctor."
Yeah, he was classic, and he's from St. Louis, where I grew up, so we had a little bit of connection. And I always like to tell the story that a lot of people don't realize he was a first base coach over there, and got another World Series ring along with all the rest of the rings he's gotten as a player and manager. But I tell the story that when I got over there, I was so excited to meet him, and he couldn't pronounce my name. He had no idea who I was. And we
Shamsky's not that hard.
I know, but it was Yogi. But we got a chance to become very good friends, and I tell the fans and people, I said, I got over there and they said Yogi's our hitting coach, our first base coach. And I tell you honestly that all the years I was there with Yogi, he never once ever talked to us about hitting.
He was the hitting coach.
He was our hitting coach. I did ask him one day, I said, I'm struggling a little bit with the bat. What should I do? He said, see it, hit it. That was it. So, but
all
Yogi,
of his things are ridiculous and yet accurate.
He was
you got to
right.
see the ball and hit the ball.
He was right. I mean, he was so profound as a person, and he was just a classic. And we had a great coaching staff with Gil as a manager, Yogi at first, Eddie Yost, a great baseball man at third, and Rube Walker, who was with the Dodgers.
He came to Brooklyn as well.
And he was our pitching coach. And it was interesting because Rube was a catcher and became the pitching coach. And then we had Joe Pignatano,
I think
another
a lot
Dodger.
of former catchers have become good pitching coaches because they understand.
They understand the game. They understand pitchers, and it was a conglomerate of great baseball people, starting with the coaching staff and all those great young pitchers that we had. And it was a wonderful team.
So let's start to bring this home with the idea. We talked about Seaver, so I want to get back to him, but I don't want to forget Jerry Koosman, a great pitcher as well. And I think you're right that there was no time during the season that Seaver and Koosman lost back-to-back games.
I think there was a period of time also at the end of the season where they were almost unbeatable together. I think they were, I'm not sure, 16-1, 15-1 at the end of the season. They were unbeatable. And quite honestly, Jerry Koosman, on any given day, I would say, could beat anybody and pitch as good as Seaver.
Seaver got most of the glory.
He got most of it. He was a Cy Young winner that year. But if we don't win Game 2 of the World Series, after I made the last out of Game 1, if we don't win Game 2 that Jerry pitched it in Baltimore and we come back to New York 0-2, we're liable to lose 4 in a row. Baltimore had such a good team. They won 108 games that year. But we came back 1-1. Jerry pitched a great game, no-hitter for 6 innings, and saved by Ron Taylor saved the game for him. And then we come back. Game 3 is on Tuesday in New York, and then we win the next 3, and it's rest is history. But I always use this phrase about Seaver and Koosman that I think for me tells it all. Seaver was Van Gogh, Koosman was Patton. I mean, they were that kind of, they were both terrific pitchers.
Describe that. That's fascinating.
Seaver was an artist. Tommy, any day could go out and pitch a no-hitter and pitch a complete game. There's a stat that I like to relate about Tom. I believe it's 200, of all his starts in baseball, over 200, 208, I believe, in his starts, he gave up 1 run or less in 7 innings. I mean, that's unbelievable as a pitcher.
Usually you start getting tired. You give up a couple runs in the
today
6th.
he wouldn't even go 7 innings.
Be still in the game.
He was such a great pitcher.
But then Koosman is Patton?
He was a guy that would stand up and fight the other team and knock a player down if he had to. He's an opposite in that respect of Seaver. Seaver was a finesse pitcher, but an overpowering pitcher. But he was an artist. Yeah. Koosman was a guy that got that ball and said, "I'm going to beat this team no matter what it takes." And I like to use that phrase because Jerry and many times that year was as good as any pitcher in baseball. But Tom, I think, will show that in history of baseball, he's one of the great pitchers of all time.
And the Mets almost accidentally, I want people to read it in the book, so we'll save it for that. But when you read it, Koosman and Seaver accidentally came to the Mets. They were lucky to have even gotten him, and they almost released Koosman. So all that, it was destined, perhaps. I don't want to forget, though, we talk about characters. So talk quickly about the pennant race with the Cubs. You had to overtake them. And they're managed by Leo DeRocher, another former Brooklyn Dodger. So you got Rube Walker and Gil Hodges, and DeRocher was an SOB, to put it mildly.
We hated him. And I mean, I didn't know him personally, but he was the kind of manager when you played against him, you just wanted to beat him. And we got into August. We were still 9 games behind the Cubs. And from that period on, we started to play unbelievable baseball, as I mentioned before. And beating DeRocher in that National League East Division was really a highlight for a lot of us, because he was just a guy that you just looked at him and you didn't want to lose to him. And it was
he loved to needle people.
Oh,
and going back to the
gosh.
Dodgers, he managed both the Dodgers and the New York Giants, and the rivalries. People thought he would be dirty. He would do anything to win.
That was the basis for this tremendous rivalry between the Cubs and the Mets in those years, and it's carried on. But for us to overtake him and the Cubs was really a big deal for us. Although it would have been a big deal for any team if we were 9 games behind
Sure.
him in August. But Leo was the kind of guy that did. And when the Black Cat, that's an incident that happened.
Talk about the Black Cat, and then I want to bring it back to California so we can close this out. But the Black Cat is a big thing.
Big game. We were playing the Cubs, and it was the top of the first inning, and we're just getting ready. A big crowd. Everybody's revved up, and all of a sudden, from underneath the stands, this Black Cat comes out, walks around the on-deck circle. Ron Santo was the batter for the Cubs, and just stares into the dugout at Leo DeRocher.
Stared at
I'm on the other side of the field because I'm on the other side, and the cat comes around and just stares at Leo DeRocher. Fergie Jenkins, the great Ferguson Jenkins, was pitching for the Cubs. He always told me, he said, if that cat would have stared at me, I wouldn't even gone back out on the mound to pitch, because I would have been freaked out.
Did the Mets put that cat out there?
Well,
what was the
it's
deal?
interesting. We talked to the grounds crew about that, and they, to a man, told us that cat never was seen before that day or after that day.
Someone
so
cooked
somebody it up. There's a story there
Little
that
superstition.
it's hard to find the truth to, but that was one of those eerie games that happened that year, along with the 19 strikeouts that Steve Carlton pitched against us, and we ended up winning the game.
Seaver almost had a perfect game. There's
Almost
a lot of great
perfect game.
anecdotes. Check this out after the miracle. But I want to close it out, Art. Talk about as much as you want here, and then again, we'll save some for the book because it's fascinating. You get out to California recently to see Tom Seaver before it's officially announced that he has dementia. Talk about the emotions of the Mets coming back together.
Well, we found out that we could see Tom, and he was going to feel okay. It was great because we drove. There was the 4 players, and then Eric Sherman, who co-wrote the book with me. And when we got there, it was a revelation to sit down with him and reminisce about it, and tell some lies, tell some stories, but it were good stories. Tom says in the
stories get better over time.
Tom says in the book they were good lies, and it was just wonderful for us to spend time with him and reminisce, because it was such a special year. All of us played a lot of years, and all of us had things that happened to us that are really memorable. But that year was so special and so important to all of us, and I think it was just great for us. The book is not about Tom Seaver; it's about the trip out there and then reminiscing with the other players. But to get out there and sit down with him and talk about things that were important to all of us, even though was at that time 48 years, but now it's 50 years. It was so special, and I think everybody got who came out there got this kind of chill to be around and sit there, and we went out to lunch and talked about things that were important for all of us to talk about. And it really is a book about camaraderie and love for fellow teammates, but also about aging. You know, we all aged and we all got older, and we've lost 10 guys from that team, Ed. And so I think life happens, but memories are still there for all of us who are part of that team. And to spend that time with Tom and get a chance to reminisce and talk about all those things that were important to us was very, very special.
Well, Art Shamsky, we appreciate that you shared some of those memories with us. Thanks for being on Front Row Seat.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right.